Hello, I'm Britt Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Everybody, welcome to Minneapolis.St.Paul Magazine and the Loft Wordplay's Book Club with Kate DiCamillo. And a very special thanks to our presenting sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. Thanks to the Ryan Reads program from Ryan Companies. While all these wordplay events are free, if you want to support the Loft's programming, you can do so by clicking the support button wherever you're watching this stream. So I am Dara Moskowitz Grumdahl. I am the mom of 2 kids in Minneapolis, and I'm a writer for Minneapolis.St.Paul Magazine. I'm a huge fan of Kate DiCamillo, who needs no introduction. She's like the best in the world. She's our most beloved and amazing writer of so many phenomenal and delightful books, including The Tales of Despero. I love that little mouse. Flora and Ulysses, Because of Winn-Dixie, and the big old 3 Rancheros books like Beverly right here. She also wrote the beautiful, the heart-touching, the charming book about a rabbit who finds everything that's important about life, which is the reason we are gathered here today. The modern fairy tale, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Kate is also kind of shy and wonderful, and we're so glad to have her. Kate, hi.
Hi, I am shy. And let's all take a moment to admire Dara's, like she's got Edward on her shoulder, and that's the door to the house in his dream. I just love that. I'm kind of mesmerized by it. So, okay, you're going to ask me tough questions, and then everybody out there is going to ask me tough questions, and I'm going to try to answer them.
Yes, but first, we're going to put you on the spot. Could you read us a chapter of Edward Tulane? It is such a beautiful book.
I'll read from the beginning, okay? Chapter 1. Once, in a house on Egypt Street, there lived a rabbit who was made almost entirely of china. He had china arms and china legs, china paws and a china head, a china torso and a china nose. His arms and legs were jointed and joined by wire so that his china elbows and china knees could be bent, giving him much freedom of movement. His ears were made of real rabbit fur, and beneath the fur there were strong, bendable wires which allowed the ears to be arranged into poses that reflected the rabbit's mood: jaunty, tired, full of ennui. His tail, too, was made of real rabbit fur and was fluffy and soft and well-shaped. The rabbit's name was Edward Tulane, and he was tall He measured almost 3 feet from the tip of his ears to the tip of his feet. His eyes were painted a penetrating and intelligent blue. In all, Edward Tulane felt himself to be an exceptional specimen. Only his whiskers gave him pause. They were long and elegant, as they should be, but they were of uncertain origin. Edward felt quite strongly that they were not the whiskers of a rabbit. Whom the whiskers had belonged to initially, what unsavory animal, was a question that Edward could not bear to consider for too long, and so he did not. He preferred, as a rule, not to think unpleasant thoughts. Edward's mistress was a 10-year-old dark-haired girl named Abilene Tulane, who thought almost as highly of Edward as Edward thought of himself. Each morning after she dressed herself for school, Abilene dressed Edward. The China Rabbit was in possession of an extraordinary wardrobe composed of handmade silk suits, custom shoes fashioned from the finest leather and designed specifically for his rabbit feet, and a wide array of hats equipped with holes so that they could easily fit over Edward's large and expressive ears. Each pair of well-cut pants had a small pocket for Edward's gold pocket watch. Abilene wound this watch for him each morning. "Now, Edward," she said to him after she was done winding the watch, "when the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 3, I will come home to you." She placed Edward on a chair in the dining room and positioned the chair so that Edward was looking out the window and could see the path that led up to the Tulane front door. Abilene balanced the watch on his left leg. She kissed the tips of his ears, and then she left. And Edward spent the day staring out at Egypt Street, listening to the tick of his watch and waiting. Of all the seasons of the year, the rabbit most preferred winter, for the sun set early then, and the dining room windows became dark, and Edward could see his own reflection in the glass. And what a reflection it was. What an elegant figure he cut. Edward never ceased to be amazed at his own fineness. I'm going to stop there because it gives you a good idea of what's going to happen, which is, my mother used to say, he's cruising for a bruising, right? I mean, I had a bunch of kids in Florida once that wrote me letters, fourth graders, saying that they thought that Edward thought that he was all that and a bag of chips. And he finds out that he's not as exceptional as he thinks he is. But I don't want to give away too much, but you can ask me difficult questions, Dara, and then we'll just slowly give away the plot.
All right. Spoilers and spoilers. Okay, so first spoiler, I read on the internet that certain Miss Kate DiCamillo had a rabbit. Spill it all. You had a stuffed rabbit?
Well, this is like one of the beautiful things about doing this via Zoom is that I can have this right here, right? So this was a gift from a friend one Christmas, and she handed me this rabbit doll, and I said, "Thank you so much. What's his name?" And she said, "Edward." And I took him home and I put him on the couch in my living room, and then every time I walked into the living room, I would kind of like scream a little bit because he was just sitting in there staring at me, you know? And I actually thought, well, I don't know if I can like have him in the house. He's kind of weirding me out. And then like the third night that I had him, I had a dream about him where he was underwater, face down on the ocean floor with no clothing on. Yeah. So that's where the story started.
Oh, didn't know if that was in your childhood or if that was, but that's like the real one.
Yeah. So, and it's fun because in the beginning, when the book was published, I actually would put this rabbit in my luggage and take him with me, because people always say, where do you get the ideas for your books? And this was a time where I had a very physical answer right here. because it's a hard question to answer sometimes. Where does the idea come from? But it was actually from receiving, and then the dream of him underwater. So now we'll just sit here with just his ears showing, okay?
All right, so I've got his ears. Well, you may have to ask him, but I want to talk about notable rabbits in literature. So first of all, a very resourceful rabbit, Bugs Bunny.
Oh, I love Bugs Bunny.
So he's from, I think, Brooklyn, and he's very good at getting in and out of trouble. What would Edward Tulane, would he get along with Bugs Bunny, or would he kind of poo-poo Bugs Bunny?
Oh, that's remember in college when we had to write our answers in a blue book? That's a blue book question. I could write a whole book about the adventures of Bugs Bunny and Edward Tulane. Bugs Bunny would think that Edward Tulane was too full of himself, and he would be making fun of him. He would be, stealing items of his clothing. He would just think he was ridiculous, and Edward would think that Bugs Bunny needed to, be more serious.
Okay, more rabbits. Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit, who's probably the most famous rabbit in literature, gets into trouble, goes into Mr. McGregor's garden, trapped in a flower pot. What would Edward Tulane think about this? Is this like small potatoes, not a big deal? Or would Edward Tulane understand the strivings of a bunny who wants strawberries?
Is that what he was after? A strawberry? Peter Rabbit was after?
After maybe carrots.
I think it was a carrot. Yeah. Don't you have a carrot? Yes. Yes. That I feel like Edward, like at least in the beginning of the story, would be very disdainful of Peter Rabbit. By the end of the story, and again, we won't say. I was going to say everybody should raise their hand who's read this book all the way through to the end, but that's not going to show me anything, is it? By the end of the book, Edward has changed considerably, and he would feel much more kindly towards Peter Rabbit.
Ooh. Okay, last important rabbit in literature.
I can't imagine who it's going to be.
White Rabbit, Alice in Wonderland.
Oh.
He's always very late, which I do not think Edward Tulane would have appreciated.
No.
On the other hand, he had a pocket watch.
He sure did. I was just thinking that. Yes.
So, would they have gotten along, or what do you think?
I think that the White Rabbit, I have a great deal of affinity for the White Rabbit because he's so nervous all the time, and that's the way I am. So, but again, Edward would just tell him to calm down. So in the beginning, Edward would find him annoying. Yes. And you're right. Although he would be very envious of that pocket watch of the White Rabbits. And it's so funny because I've never thought of that before. Do you think I subconsciously took that?
These are my hard-hitting questions.
Yeah.
So have you thought about these notable rabbits? The Velveteen Rabbit is a little bit, in the wheelhouse of Edward. And this is a story of a bunny that's given to a sick child. And then the bunny wants to become real. And no spoilers, people haven't read the Velveteen Rabbit. But rabbits, literature, it's kind of a popular thing. Did you have any of these in your mind when you were a child, or when you were writing, or just in general?
No, I try to have nothing in my mind because if I try to do anything, or if I'm consciously thinking about something, I know I'm going to mess the story up. So for me, with that dream that I had where Edward was underwater, I started with that image and I thought, okay, this is going to be a picture book, and it'll be very short. And I sat down to write, and it was just if I had ideas in my head about what to do or what other rabbits had preceded Edward, I would have messed up. Instead, I just followed the story that wanted to be told. And it's kind of like getting out of your own way, the story is smarter than I am by a long shot,
I don't think so, but we'll just let that go. But do you, there's kind of, I feel like there's two things that make Edward Tulane spectacular, maybe three things. The writing, but then is such a relatable character. And I feel like all these bunnies in literature, the more you think about them, they're kind of, bunnies are a nice stand-in because they're not exactly kids and they're not exactly adults, but they're kind of in the wheelhouse of kids. They're kind of like, you know, they're not tough and scary like wolves. They're
No, but it's interesting because this is not rabbit related, but it is this thing that's very unique to Edward as a rabbit doll, although he would not like the word doll, in that he's utterly powerless. He can't even close his eyes. He can't move. He can't talk. And in a way, you feel silence like that sometimes as a kid, and you feel like you have no control. So I think that feeling, which we as adults are also familiar with too, where we feel silenced and we feel not taken seriously. And I think that's Edward kind of taps into that some. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. I love how it's kind of like a fairy tale. He doesn't have to, nobody has to, like, their alarm clock doesn't go off and then they have to check their, remote learning app or whatever. So I want to do a fairy tale lightning round. So I want you to say if the following fairy tales are, in your opinion, Kate DiCamillo, good, bad, or just like meh. All right.
Well, can I just say as a disclaimer right up front, I love all fairy tales.
No,
but,
you don't.
Yes, no, but I'll play the game anyway, Dara. Okay. All right. So go ahead.
All right. Cinderella. There's a lady who had a bad family, but everything works out when she loses a glass shoe. Good, bad, or meh?
Oh, it's good. It's good. It's so good that it repeats through every possible culture, right? Every culture has their Cinderella story. So yes. Okay, good. All right.
Little Red Riding Hood. Bringing grandma lunch just got more interesting. Good, bad, or meh?
No, it's fantastic because there's the wolf pretending to be a grandmother with that little cap on his head. And remember, Little Red Riding Hood says, your teeth, grandmother. Yes, it's profound. I give Little Red Riding Hood like very, very good. Okay.
Oh, all right. Hansel and Gretel, always be careful when you find a candy house.
Yeah, and Hansel and Gretel is terrifying too.
So scary.
It really is. I mean, and that happens so often in fairy tales where somebody is taken off into the forest and left by a parent. Yeah, it's terrifying. So yeah, but that's it. I would have to say that's good. See, I love all the fairy tales.
All right, you are proving that.
Yeah.
All right. Only two more. Billy Goat's Gruff are three goats trying to get across a bridge by maybe not the smartest troll.
Yeah, but the three Billy Goats Gruff is laugh out loud funny, but the troll is all, and I love that troll. And I think about the three Billy Goats Gruff every time I walk over a bridge. This is the kind of fairy tale person that I exist in that world all the time. There's a little bridge over Minnehaha Creek, and every time I go over it, I think of the three Billy Goats Gruff. Yeah.
All right, the last one, good, bad, or meh, though I think I know where this is going. Pinocchio. He's a puppet who lies, but eventually wants to become a real boy.
Yeah. Hey, Dara, have you ever read the original unabridged Pinocchio?
No, I should. I will.
Yeah, you definitely should, because it's like a fever dream. There's a point in that book where there's a coffin being carried by 5 black rabbits. And it's just like, it is like, and I had an illustrated Pinocchio unabridged when I was a kid. That's still, and actually it's strange that you would say Pinocchio, because the last time I got that book out and was leafing through it, it's got these lavish illustrations. I thought, this is a lot of, it's so much a part of my subconscious that I think that's a lot of where Edward came from. Yeah. So yeah. Well done, Dara. Those are very good. I give them all A+ fairytale ratings. So yeah.
Okay, so then I wanted to ask you, because this is something you did. You made Edward Tulane more like a fairy tale and less like something like Flora and Ulysses, where they have vacuum cleaners and modern things.
Yeah.
What's the kind of appeal about having a fairy tale kind of universe, or the appeal of having something like Flora and Ulysses where there are vacuum cleaners and cars and things?
I am endlessly drawn to the fairy tale, and the way in always to a fairy tale. And I knew that I was in a fairy tale as soon as I started to write this, because of the very first word of the book, which is once. And as soon as you say once, it implies once upon a time. And then you're in fairy tale. And I love that, because you're joining all of those age-old fairy tales. You're joining that collective wonderment by using the word once. But you also, there's kind of like an expectation for us being told a story like that about what's going to happen. So there's a framework in place as soon as you say that once. And I love that. However, I do love vacuum cleaners. And I do love vacuum cleaners that, transform squirrels into superheroes who write poetry. So I like having it's so funny, because just today, as I was eating my breakfast, I was laughing, thinking about how James Joyce, who wrote, Ulysses, would be very upset that there was a vacuum cleaner named Ulysses, the Ulysses 2000X, plus a squirrel named Ulysses. So I like playing around with all of those modern things and turning them into something kind of ridiculous. I've always loved Looney Tunes, and that seems kind of like a Looney Tune-ish kind of thing. So
It does. It does. Okay, so
are my answers too long? Do you want me to be more quiet?
They're perfect. They're
Okay.
absolutely perfect.
Okay. I'm getting very wound up here in my office. So
Well, everybody is getting wound up in our respective offices and so on. Because, one of the reasons we're talking about Edward Tulane today, it was supposed to be an opera that was going to come out, but it got delayed. Everything has got delayed. There's not a child in America, I don't think right now, who is not experiencing disappointment of some kind or another. Maybe it's a big disappointment or little disappointment. Birthday parties are getting canceled left and right. Many bad things are happening that are bigger than that. But one of the things that's amazing about reading Edward Tulane is that he dealt with disappointment, tragedy, troubles. One of the things I really love about Edward Tulane is that he doesn't always deal with it well. I think all of us have in our minds that we're supposed to be, dealt a bad hand, and then we're just like, oh, that was fine. I'm bigger than that. I'm brave. But it's hard. It's really hard.
It's hard.
Edward Tulane and difficult disappointments and, handling them kind of well, not well, or well eventually.
It's a beautiful point. I love that point, because he doesn't. He doesn't handle things well at all. And not only that, he's selfish and self-centered for at least a good 2/3 of this book. It's only slowly that he learns empathy and love. And again, we don't want to give away spoilers for people who haven't read it, but there's a poem that starts the book that is a Stanley Kunitz poem, and I just used a stanza of it, but it's the heart breaks and breaks and lives by breaking. It is necessary to go through dark and deeper dark and not to turn. And I think that the words of that poem resonates with all of us right now, because we're all dealing with disappointment. Our hearts are all getting broken in various ways. Edward's heart breaks and breaks, and then it learns to live, by breaking. So there is a happy ending at the end of this book. So
Yes, he is a hero. He is a hero we need now because it's a lot of disappointments. It's difficult. You get unsatisfied with yourself. You think, oh, I should be braver. I should be unaffected or something. But I have the last question. I don't think this is a spoiler, but I hope not. So at one point in the book, Edward Tulane meets a very old doll who is at least.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you're going to do this because it's my favorite part of the book. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So she lives for hundreds of years, possibly even longer. So do you think Edward Tulane is out there living today like a very old doll?
That's a beautiful question. Do you know how long I've been going around talking about this book?
No.
14 years and no one's ever, it's like, I love that question. I don't know. I hope so. And I hope that he's sitting on a shelf, imparting wisdom to somebody else, what he's learned. That's a beautiful thought. Yeah. I can't answer that. I can only hope that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the part where we kind of toss it back to Abby from the Loft. She's going to help us answer some audience questions. It's so great to be able to do this. So Abby, you have any questions?
Hi, Abby.
Awesome. Hello. Thank you so much, Kate and Dara. This has been awesome. And we have so many questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. But the first of which is coming from, let's see if it has a name here, Elaine. And Elaine is wondering, I've always wondered if the baby doll who shows up in Lucius Clark's shop is the same baby doll that once belonged to Sarah Ruth. The fact that both dolls' faces were shattered into a million pieces seems too coincidental.
Elaine, where does it say where Elaine is?
It does not say where Elaine is.
Okay,
No.
well, Elaine, wherever you are, I, as the person who wrote that, and this is the wonderful thing about telling stories, I have to tell you that never occurred to me that they could be the same doll. And then I started to get letters from kids telling me that they were the same doll. And I did not plan it at all. And I am happy to believe that that is true, but it was never in my mind that that could be the case. But I like to think that it is so, but it's not my intention when I wrote.
It's like some really astute readers and dedicated readers too. All right, let's see. This one is coming from Mary, who's commenting from Newark. Hi, Kate. I'm curious about the geographical setting of the book. As a school librarian, I've been reading Edward aloud to my fourth graders. I use a Southern accent because Abilene sounds so Gentile and Southern, but then Edward seems to end up somewhere in Maine. Can you help me figure this out?
Mary, you're a librarian. You're reading to your kids. I love you for that. Thank you. And I love librarians. Again, we're going to have to say the person who wrote the story is not the expert here. So I didn't go all the way to mapping it out in my head because I had an idea of where we were time-wise. I thought it was sometime between the First World War and the Second World War. And I know that I believe that we start somewhere in the South. That is correct. And then it seems like he ended up somewhere on the coast of Nova Scotia or something like that, I would say. But I've never mapped it all the way out. So whatever you believe, Mary, that is the truth about where we are. And thank you for reading to your kids when they come into your library. It matters so much.
Thank you. Let's see. This question comes from Toby. Many of your books have characters that have experienced great loss. And was this something you or someone close to you experienced as a child, or was there a reason you give a voice to children or people who have experienced loss? Either way, they say thank you.
Toby, I think that anybody who is here in this world experiences loss and sadness and sorrow. And I think that a lot of times people don't want to think about kids feeling those things, but kids do feel those things. And so, and I certainly did. I mean, I grew up in a single parent home. I was always kind of had questions about where my dad was and why he had left. And so in the person that writes the books, a lot of it comes from the 8-year-old me who was worried and afraid a lot. And I think that we all have sorrows, whether we're 8 or 80. And I think that part of the thing that stories can do, either writing them or reading them, is kind of help us name our sorrows and give them shape. So I don't set out to write sad stories. Even when it's the story of a squirrel being sucked up in a vacuum cleaner, and it's funny, there is still sadness in it because life is hard and it's also beautiful. So I feel like stories should reflect that.
What an appropriate answer for the time we're in, too.
Yeah.
This question doesn't seem to have a name, so apologies to whoever's asking it, but fittingly, you have such creative names for your literary characters. How do you create their names? Are they people you've known, names you've seen, or do they just pop into your head?
Yeah, I have to say everything about writing is hard for me, except for the names. The names a lot of times are the first thing to arrive, and I always keep a notebook with me, and they do pop into my head. Sometimes I'll misread a sign and think with my strange, like my brain twists it, and I'll get a name that way. But I keep a running list of names in the back of the notebook, and I wait for those names to show up in stories. So it is the easiest part for me, and I can really get carried away with the naming business. So.
Great. Let's see. This one is from another Mary. What words of advice do you have for someone who wants to be a writer?
Mary, the other Mary. So this Mary is not a librarian, but this Mary is surely a reader, which is the first thing that I would say to anybody who wants to be a writer, which is read. Almost everything that you need to know about how to write, you learn by reading. And the other way you learn it, and everybody's always kind of like, oh no, really? Is you have to write. and you teach, it's like, it's great if you can take a class, but basically you teach yourself how to write by reading and by writing. And I was somebody who for a long time wanted to be a writer and didn't write. And you keep on thinking that something magical is going to happen that will turn you into a writer. The only thing that will happen that will turn you into a writer is that you sit down and start writing, and it's terrifying. And so you should read, you should write, and for me the easiest way to write is to show up and do it every day, just a little bit. So that, and keep a notebook and pay attention to everything. Everything is your business when you write, all of it. You should stare at everybody. But pretend like you're not staring at them.
Very covert.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's see. This one also doesn't have a name, but Bryce was a child left on his own in the world, and yet he encountered adult after adult who looked the other way or treated him harshly. Was it hard to write all the adults who did exactly the opposite of what a responsible adult who encountered him should have done?
Wow. That's a tough question. And it's true. Bryce is kind of betrayed again and again by the adult world. And actually, when you think about it, there are a lot of adults who are not very effective in my books. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. All of Bryce was heartbreaking to write about. That. To me, Bryce and Edward Tulane was the most difficult character. And again, I won't give anything away, but there's a moment when he has to do something that still haunts me. And, I get asked a lot about writing sequels for various books, and I've never really thought in terms of sequels, but there was a little boy once in Illinois who stood up and said, okay, you're not going to write a sequel. I know. But what about a novel that's about Bryce and what happened to Bryce? And I do think about Bryce, and maybe I'll redeem myself as an adult by telling Bryce's story. Yeah.
That answered, quite a few people were asking about a sequel of some kind about Bryce. So that answered their questions
Yeah.
too.
And he haunts me, and I don't know, I've talked about it so much now. And in my way of writing, I always think if you talk about it, then you don't write it. So I worry that I've talked about it too much. So let's not talk about it anymore.
All right, we'll cut that one off. All right, this one is from G. What are you reading at the moment?
What am I reading at the moment? Well, I've got, I'm here in the house. I'm either out walking or I'm here in the house, and I've got books all over the house. I've got Britt Robinson's The Mothers upstairs. I'm rereading Mary Norton's The Borrowers. I reread Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. I've got a Mary Oliver book of essays. I've got, I'm rereading News of the World for a little Zoom book club that I'm in with friends. That's Paulette Giles. So yeah, it's book city around here. Yeah.
It's a good time for it.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. This question comes from another Mary. We have so many Marys on here.
Mary? Mary? Is that just you?
Just Mary a bunch of times. Different last names, so it must just be the crowd today. This one, let's see. Mike and Jocelyn love reading all your books. Alasia wanted to know about the Red Rabbit Barrette in Louisiana's Hair from Louisiana's Way Home. I told them how sometimes authors use Easter eggs in their stories. So would you care to share any Easter eggs? Do you use them?
I apparently I use them unwittingly because I I didn't, that was one that never occurred to me until Louisiana's book came out, and she had, the Barrettes, her Lucky Bunny Barrettes appear in Rainy first, but I never made that connection between Edward. The one time I did it purposefully, I write these books about a pig who lives on Decawoo Drive, Mercy Watson, and then there are also books about some of the other people who live on Decawoo Drive. One of them is an older lady named Baby Lincoln. And Baby Lincoln is on a train, and she's reading a comic strip with a gentleman, and it's about a squirrel who is a superhero. And that was, so I did that one on purpose. But most of the time, I think you see the theme of this, I never know what I'm doing. It's only afterwards that people point it out to me that I can see it.
Perfect. Well, I think we have time for just a couple more. This one is from Amanda. Did a toy or object from your childhood inspire you to write about Edward and his journey into the hearts of so many people?
Yeah, nope. It was this rabbit from my adulthood, but I was a kid who loved my stuffed animals and had lots of different animals and thought that they were, so I've been haunted by all those toys. So although this rabbit is the one who was the inspiration, it's also how I felt as a kid about all of those toys that I had.
This one is from Julia, age 7. What was your favorite story you've ever written?
Julia, my favorite story that I've ever written. Oh boy, I can never do that, and it's funny because even as I was reading the beginning of Edward Tulane, I was thinking about words that I would change. It's like it's like, well, that doesn't sound right. And I was actually like, I wanted to cross it out. So I can never, all of which is to say they never seem done, the stories, and they never seem perfect. And it's impossible for me to pick a favorite. Although if you really forced me, Julia, the very first book that I wrote was Because of Winn-Dixie. And I feel so grateful for that book because writing that book then led to all these other books, and I get to do this for a living. So let's say Winn-Dixie for today, right now.
Well, it remains to be a favorite of mine. So I grew up reading that book. So. We have so many people asking about the possibility of an Edward Tulane movie. Can you speak to that? Is that happening?
Sure, it is. It will happen. I believe this absolutely. It will happen. I don't know when, but there's a beautiful script. There are people behind it, and it will happen. So it's the same thing as with the opera being canceled or postponed until 2021. It's just Edward is good at waiting, and we're all going to have to be good at waiting along with him.
This will be the last one. This one is from Mrs. Stifler, who is a 3rd grade teacher. What do you hope is the message that students and adults take away from this book?
Oh, I never think in terms of messages, because, the story is something that I tell, and then it becomes yours when you read it. And so it's a different experience for everybody. And everybody's going to take something different from it. It's kind of like a dialogue between the two of us. I hope that maybe readers, young and old, walk away with their hearts more open. But that's the hope of every story that I tell too. So just maybe our hearts open up a little bit. And I think stories in general do that. They open our hearts. And so that's the message, maybe.
Great. I think that is a great place to turn it back over to you and Dara and Kate. Thank you so much. This has been such a treat as someone who has grown up reading your books, Kate. So thank you.
Oh, Abby, thank you. So you read Winn-Dixie when you were a kid?
Yes, and I remember really vividly reading Tale of Despero in one day. I just consumed it. So I think your books are a lot of the reason I work in a literary organization now. So thank you.
Oh, great. You're going to make me cry on Zoom.
Sorry, I sprung that on you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back to
You
you
did a
guys.
great job with those questions.
Thank
Okay, Dara, you're in charge.
Okay. Can everyone see me? There you are. All right. I wanted to, I guess we'll just close with one more point. There's a part in the book that I just love. So at one point you write, whatever it was that had begun in Nellie's kitchen, Edward's new and strange ability to sit very still and concentrate the whole of his being on the stories of another became invaluable. And I just love that so much. I think that's what you do. You allow us all to kind of sit still and concentrate on the stories of another, and it is invaluable. So Kate, thank you so much.
Now you're going to make me cry, and I don't even remember that quote. It's so, I love it. I love it. Thank you. What a beautiful compliment.
Thank you. All right. On behalf of children and readers throughout America, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all the writing you've done. Thank you for sharing with us. It's just so fantastic. Isn't reading the best? Isn't writing the best? We're so lucky.
Reading is the best. Writing is the best. Reading aloud, it really matters. So thank you to all of you for reading. Yeah. And Dara, thank you for that beautiful quote, which I didn't write.
Oh, you did. All right. Well, thank you all for coming today. We want to thank the people that made this possible. St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. Without them, none of this would have been possible. Thanks to the Ryan Reads program of the Ryan Companies. So while all the Wordplay events are free, if you'd like to support the Loft's programming, we would love that. You can click the support button wherever you're watching this stream. If you need a fresh copy of Edward Tulane, please buy one from our friends at Red Balloon at the link for book sales. And if you had fun reading Edward Tulane and you live in Minnesota, check out the One Book, One Minnesota program. Statewide book club kicking off with Kate DiCamillo's Because of Winn-Dixie. Such a great book. And that's happening through local libraries throughout Minnesota. So thanks again to Kate DiCamillo. Thanks again to all of you. I'm Dara Moskowitz Grumdahl, and I say goodbye and happy reading and hooray for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.